Studio, where we are focusing on the national root and tuber crop development strategy for the period 2019 to 2022. And in studio, I have a panel which will help me dissect this and why this is important and critical for food security in the country. And to my immediate left, I have Juma Mohammed from the Ministry of Agriculture, where he's the head of the directorate focusing on the roots and tubers matters. And I have Florence Munguzi from KEFIS, where she's heading up the section in terms of quarantine and biosafety. And to her left, I have Stephen Katingima, who is a country lead for TruTrade Africa, which is a social impact company which tries to support smallholder farmers looking for route to market. And on the extreme end, I have George Okeo, and George Okeo is the head of programs at Self Help Africa. Welcome on set.
Thank you.
I'd like us to appreciate the fact that perhaps many Kenyans might not really understand the roots and tubers strategy which has just been developed, covering the period 2019 to 2022. If I could start with Juma here, just to give us a brief as to what this is and why this is critical for the country.
Yeah, my name is Juma Mohammed from the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, State Department for Crop Development and Agricultural Research. I'm actually the head of the Roots and Tuber Crops Unit at the Ministry, Kilimo House. And why this is important, you will realize that these are the crops that were previously called orphaned crops, that not very many people are focusing on them. But as we move on with the population increase, with having done a lot in terms of the other crops, now we have to look for strategies so that we ensure that we have enough food for the consumption of our people. Mm-hmm. Now, these crops were previously neglected, and they had some negative perception that they were poor man's crops. But now, with the interest in terms of population, climate change, these are the crops actually which are resilient to the vagaries of the weather. Yeah. And these are the ones that will contribute towards achievement of the food and nutrition security in the Big Four agenda.
I see.
That's why now we are bringing them on board so that we might increase the food availability in the country.
Okay.
That's why they're important.
Before I move to Florence, just to stay with you, Juma, it sounded to me when I was reading the report that perhaps we didn't have a strategy around these crops before, or what was the situation?
Yes, actually that's true. This is the first strategy to promote the crops. As I said earlier, they were at the back of our food security strategies. So this is now when they are coming up. You've realized the issue of health, the issue of industrialization. So for industrialization, you will have these crops also going into the feed industry, even in the manufacturing. Yes.
I see.
Yep.
And when Juma talks about these crops, he means the Irish potatoes, cassava, sweet potatoes, cocoa yams and yams, which
yep.
definitely fall within the roots and tubers. I want to move to Florence there. And why is this a particularly important strategy when you talk about food security in this country? He has already alluded to the Big Four agenda, which of course had food security as a key pillar.
Thank you so much. I work with KEFIS, which is the Plant Health Inspectorate Service, and our mandate basically is matters of plant health, seed certification, as well as issues of plant variety protection. And when you talk about these crops, as we address the issues of food security, seed is a very important matter, so that we cannot shy away from discussing matters about seed. Yeah. And about this strategy as KEFIS, it's a good roadmap because it will help us as we even streamline the issues of standards in terms of certification programs for these crops. Because when you compare to other crops like maize, there is well-established formal seed system. But when in terms of these root and tuber crops, it's very important for us to focus on ensuring that farmers have clean planting materials. Because current practice, especially in relation to these crops, it's majorly informal, whereby farmers recycle their seeds, and these are aspects that are leading basically to lack of these clean planting materials. Because circulation of these, recycling of these planting materials again, there are issues of diseases that we cannot shy away from talking about. Okay. These diseases are the ones that are majorly also affecting the issues of low productivity. So when you look at the strategy on the aspects of strategies to increase productivity, we cannot shy away from talking about seed, which is the reason as to why KEFIS has to come on board.
I see. And at least later on we'll be discussing the whole point of standards and
Yes.
why this is critical, especially when you're talking about roots and tubers. But I want to get to Stephen there, who's playing a very instrumental role in terms of assisting smallholder farmers get route to market. But when I was looking at the report and the strategy rather, and one of the key items I noticed is that when you plot the productivity of a number of these crops, is that productivity has been declining. When you look at things like potatoes especially. Why is this the case? Is it the indication that farmers have been abandoning production of the same, or what?
From my observation, especially when we're dealing with smallholder farmers, I think what my colleague has just alluded to, the availability of good planting material has been a big factor affecting that. And you find that farmers now recycling their seeds quite a bit and reducing productivity. That has a big effect, especially on the market side, and this is where we really come in, trying to address two issues. One is the issue of price volatility and also consistency of supply. Because with declining production, then those two become a major factor affecting the smallholder farmers, because they're getting lower yields from the same acreage, whereas the counterparts in neighboring countries like Uganda, Tanzania are getting twice or thrice as much, and that's been affecting how the markets work in this particular country.
I see.
Yeah.
And just to stay with you before I move on to George there is a discussion around, we used to have agricultural extension officers, but over the years this has become a little weaker from what we have observed. How are smallholder farmers being supported, especially when it comes to things like demonstration plots on how best practice would be in terms of productivity of this kind of crops?
That's a big challenge, I must admit, because I think even from the Ministry of Agriculture, they can admit that they haven't been hiring extension officers over the past couple of years. And there's a big gap, especially for smallholder farmers, in accessing that support at the farm level. And that's where a lot of development agencies have really been coming in to support the farmers, smallholder farmers. And I know a lot of development agencies that are doing a lot of work, some of whom we work with very closely in helping setting up these demo plots and showing them what good productivity will look like, giving them access to clean planting material, and then we come in now and provide that support in terms of linking them to markets at that particular level.
I see.
Yeah.
And George, I want you to just tell us, first of all, what Self-Help Africa does and why this particular strategy is important for you.
Thank you so much. Self-Help Africa is an international NGO. We are one of the civil societies that work here in Kenya. And our main target is this working with the smallholder farmers. So what we try to do is that we bring the players within the agricultural sector together to be able to reach out and see how to support the smallholder farmers. We are working in 9 African countries, and Kenya is just one of the countries that we work in. We started working in Kenya about 15 years ago. And our work revolves about supporting the smallholder farmers to be able to increase on their productivity, that is the yield per acre or per output area. And then we also deal with working with the enterprises that actually work very closely with the smallholder farmers. But also the third part, which is also very important, is about influencing issues related to policy. And that's how the roots and tuber crops development strategy comes in. So we feel that the smallholder farmer cannot be able to thrive in terms of productivity or in terms of earning more income if the enabling environment is not conducive enough for them to be able to operate effectively. Okay. So that's the reason why we are here. We've worked in quite a number of counties, almost the whole Kenya, since our inception, and we have key partners that we work with. Of specific interest is the European Union, who has really supported us in terms of making or reaching out to the farmers and all that. Now, why this strategy? If you look at the roots and tuber crops, it has been neglected for quite some time. When I was growing and I was young, we used to take cassava, we used to take sweet potatoes and all that. And if you look at the young generation currently, that is not the direction they want to move towards. If you look at countries other than Kenya that have embraced the roots and tuber crops, they have got no issues related to food and nutrition security. Uganda, our neighbor here, is doing a lot in terms of cassava. Nigeria is known for cassava. Mozambique is known for cassava. And you'll never see these perennial food security issues, which brings us back to our food or eating habits. So in Kenya, we have to think in a different direction, not necessarily depending on maize as our staple food, but getting an alternatives for us to be able to address this issue of food security.
But the question then would be posed to you, is it about, you see, the strategy could adjust matters on the supply side, that we're working on putting out cassava, etc.
Yes.
But the demand side, these are consumer behaviors. I mean, Kenyans perhaps dislike
yes.
meat, for example. So you could work on increasing supply, but
yes.
then how do you deal with demand?
Yes, the strategy itself is a roadmap, and is a roadmap that is looking at the sector in totality. So it's addressing issues related to productivity. It is addressing issues related to market access. It is addressing issues related to financial or credit access. And so it gives us a roadmap in terms of identifying what are some of the opportunities at each of these levels. So if we talk about the productivity, you're looking at, are we able, what are the strategies we'll put in place to be able to increase the capacity or the skills of the farmers to be able to produce, to get more. You are looking at what Florence was talking about, access to quality planting materials or seeds. Mm-hmm. You are looking at extension services. If you look at this country, and let us be honest, extension services is dead. When the agricultural sector was actually devolved, if you walk to any of the counties, probably I may be right to find that nobody goes to support the farmer. And the reason are enormous. Look at what the government is doing in terms of now trying to come up to recruit interns, which means what Stephen was talking about, that the last time the government probably employed was 1996, 1997, when we were still in the university. So they are now running against time because they are not feeling that it's at the workforce is going towards 50, 60 years, and there is no succession plan. If you look at the market side, there are issues related to quality standards. There are issues related to being able to attract investment within this sector, to be able to invest in the roots and tuber crops. Yeah. The credit access actually will come in when there is a market, which is the pool. If there is no market in this country for any value chain or any crop, definitely we are not heading anywhere. So the strategy is actually about the totality. It's not only addressing the productivity aspects only.
Great, and I want to come to Juma because it sits at the ministry, and rightly as you pointed out, agriculture is now a devolved function. And perhaps one of the key questions that would emerge around the strategy is how have we ensured that then there were synergies between the devolved system, and the devolved governments, I should say, not system, and the national government in terms of executing this strategy?
Yeah, we have, of course, after the devolution, the agriculture was devolved, there are institutions that were formed. In the ministry, we have the Joint Agricultural Secretariat that links the national and the counties through the Council of Governors. And of course, there are the ministers, the county ministers, the CECM, that have formed a caucus so that you can reach them, not necessarily going through the whole country. Which means we are still linked in terms of cooperation, in terms of ensuring that agriculture is still the backbone of our economy. Now, when we are developing our policies or strategies like this one, there is that cooperation that we have to link with the extension service in the country, in the counties, so that we are in tandem in what we are thinking about. So, my colleague there mentioned about extension being at least low key. I wouldn't say it is dead, as you know, when something is dead, it's dead. It is low key. In terms of once we devolved, we created some 47 extension services, even though we have that linkage. But each county moves at a different pace. But you will still find that there are some extension activities going on. So we are still in link, we are still connected to the counties, and in the mandate we are given as the national government policy development, capacity building the counties, standards, and also we are the link with the outside world. So we are still in link with the counties. Now, he mentioned about the issue of interns. We are also aware that you find a lot of youth, even if you go at the university level, at the colleges level, most of our youth are not going into the agriculture business. They are going into these other courses. So then again, you also miss the new generation coming into agriculture, and that's something that we are supposed to. We are actually looking into it to try and maybe understand why are the youth running away from agriculture. Yes.
Okay. I'd like to get Florence and really talk about the subject of standards and quality, especially when you talk about roots and tubers.
Yep.
Would be curious to know, do we have a framework in place which would ensure then that the quality of standards, at least it is prescribed, that farmers should, you just saw the story we ran around pesticides, and for a long time it has been a bit of a gray area in terms of what is allowed and what is not. When we look at roots and tubers, what's the situation like?
So when I talk back about what we do as KEFIS, there are the aspects of plant health. That is where the issues of plant diseases come in. And one of the major aspects of any crop, we have to have the starting material. We have the breeders, like the KALRO, Kenya Agricultural Livestock Research Organization. We have also international organizations and other breeders, even in the universities, who come up with new varieties, for example. In relation to the root and tuber, they breed new varieties that are adapting to different agroecological zones, or either high maturing or high nutritious. So once these products are developed, KEFIS comes in to ensure that these varieties are evaluated through national performance trials. So we have standards in place for that, to evaluate these varieties and ensure that they are now officially released through a national variety release system, that now they can be accessible to the farmers. And once that happens, then now seed companies or seed growers or anyone interested in coming on board to start producing seed, KEFIS also has standards to ensure that we work with you throughout the whole production, because there are matters we check. Other than the plant issues of diseases and pests, we also check a number of aspects, especially trueness to type. To that I mean, if you're growing a particular variety of interest, maybe to the processors, for example, we don't want you to have mixtures that will possibly help you lack maybe the market for your product. So there are set rules and standards in terms of, if you want to venture into seed production, for example, what are you supposed to do? There's a procedure, there's a whole process of registering as a seed grower or a seed merchant, and KEFIS comes on board to assist you through the whole process to ensure that we have these materials that are of good quality, and as well as of the desirable varieties to the farmers. So when you talk of a case of like maize and other grain, calling like the TruTrade seed, in comparison to the vegetatively propagated crops, and for this case on our subject of matter on root and tuber crops, by their nature being vegetatively propagated crops is a challenge by itself, because they are highly perishable. You cannot compare cassava cuttings, for example, or sweet potato vines to maize seed that you can even store. So the aspects of perishability also comes in. So in itself, there are challenges in terms of having a clear system on vegetatively propagated crops in the seed system. And that is what KEFIS is currently working closely with other stakeholders to ensure that it's clear on how exactly we are supposed to carry out this process. And now we are reviewing, we have the act, the Seed and Plant Varieties Act, that governs our operation, especially in terms of now checking on the seed certification. So the regulations on vegetatively propagated crops, because we identified it's a gap on how to handle such crops in comparison to others. So there's a step now, because there is the regulations that we are currently trying to see whether they would now fit into the same. But even as all this happens, it does not mean that nothing is happening. So whoever is currently doing these crops to produce materials for farmers, like Save of Africa, KEFIS has been working closely with the NGO the farmers that have been selected to multiply these materials to supply clean materials to the farmers, we carry out inspection, and KEFIS has set standards on how to inspect these crops and certify to ensure at the end of the day, and especially the aspects of diseases, because like I mentioned, being a vegetatively propagated crops, there is that risk of spreading the diseases, because most of the practice to many farmers, almost everywhere in most of the rural households, you rarely see someone going to buy a sweet potato vine as a seed, the way you'd go to Agrovite to buy maybe maize seed. It's just the normal practice. You come to your neighbor, you borrow your materials, so you just save yours, then you recycle. At the end of the day, farmers are not aware that practice is making them continually revolve back these diseases to their farms and entirely to affect their productivity. So at the end of the day, even with this strategy, we are seeing that there is need for a lot of awareness creation, and number one, on importance of these crops, because like we mentioned, everyone knows that there used to be called orphan, neglected crops, but currently even you look at most of the urban markets, and especially even the hotels and the breakfasts, most of the people are now going back to those roots, in comparison to something like bread and other delicacies. So it shows that people are appreciating that we need to go back, because most of them, especially like currently, there's a lot of awareness and people are so conscious about their nutrition. Yeah. And for example, when you talk about sweet potato, there's a lot of work, and especially International Potato Center has been championing a lot on varieties that are high rich in nutrients, especially vitamin A. There are varieties that are now currently very popular, orange-fleshed sweet potato varieties. So as KEFIS, we work with all those actors, the breeders, those who are in the processing industry, because at the end of the day, you find processors are also interested in a particular variety. So if breeders come up and breed towards that, then again KEFIS will come in to ensure these varieties at the end of the day, they reach to the farmers in good quality without pests and diseases and all the desirable traits, and again to meet also the market that they demand.
Florence, on that note, I have two questions for you. One is that you'll appreciate that the phrase vegetatively propagated crops is not an everyday term.
Sure.
You should explain that to lay persons like ourselves. And then the second one is, I'm wondering of the cost element, because finally, if I'm a farmer, definitely the degree to which it dents my pocket will of course be an incentive or disincentive on my uptake on the same. So how does this breed, which has been certified by KEFIS and has been deemed to be the best, vary in terms of cost vis-a-vis what of course I'll just go and pick from wherever?
If I start with the aspect of vegetative, I mean, these are materials that you can grow from any part of the plant. For example, if I take cassava, you know, cassava when it grows, it can produce the true seeds, but the major propagative material, the one that you use to plant, is usually either the cuttings, mostly. When you talk about this sweet potato, is the vines, because when people talk about seed, now they imagine the seed like maize or beans and all that, but these are crops that you use these other plant parts to plant a seed.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is, it has its own difference from the normal true seed.
And on the cost element?
On the cost element, like I mentioned, because the whole process, there is cost involved in terms of inspection and other costs. At the end of the day, you see there is some added cost on the same. But if farmers understand the value of that, the reason as to why I would invest more on a certified seed to buy, because of the long-term benefits that I will get, again, that would be not be an issue or a big issue to the farmers.
I see.
Yeah.
And George, you seem to have an
yes. I just wanted to bring, just to add to what, or to answer the question of the cost element.
Yeah.
For vegetative seeds, propagated cuttings like what Florence is talking about, it is important for our smallholder farmers to realize that when you use a quality planting material, the productivity increases. That is the most important thing. We have had situations where you go and visit, for example, your auntie in Busia, and you find he has a shamba of cassava, and then you just get in and get the cuttings and go and plant it whichever place you came from.
Yeah.
And not considering that whatever you are taking is either infested using with the pest, or a disease is infested with a cassava mosaic disease. So the moment you go and plant this, you find that the yield is almost 20% what you could have gotten. And that's the reason why KEFIS is coming in at hand, and we are supporting them on this, so that they can be able to reach out to, we call them seed entrepreneurs, those who do or produce seeds for the purpose of selling. They are certified, they produce quality, so that when a farmer goes and buys, he gets the optimal yield that is required. And that is an element of cost, and will bring the cost of production down.
But George, on the same point, I'd imagine that by the time I go, for example, to my grandmother's parcel and I'm just getting a cutting of the same,
yes,
I'm most likely getting this for subsistence. I'm not doing this on a commercial basis.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know how sizable are the number of farmers who do this on a commercial scale in this country?
Commercial scale can be provided at different levels, and what you could do is probably use the size of land to be able to determine whether a farmer is doing it at a commercial rate and all that, as a commercial magnitude or not. Most of the people, or most of the smallholder farmers, do this at subsistence level. And that's why this strategy is important, that we should be able to, if you go to some other areas, and the reason why it's called orphaned crops is that you'll find a parcel of land behind somebody's house that has rocks, and that's where they plant the cassava. And you know, they don't plant it for the purpose of probably going to sell it, but for the purpose of subsistence. So that is the direction that we need to look. We will need to increase on the size of land that is actually required, or that is sufficient for us to be able to break even. And this is, if you look at it in terms of the commercial aspect, between 1.5 to 2 tons, 1.5 to 2 acres is sufficient enough for you to look at it in terms of a commercial scale. So this number is actually limited because of the size of the land. But there are specific areas in this country that still have huge chunk of land. They are dry and arsal areas. These areas are the places that we need to target with these kind of crops.
I see.
Yes.
Steve, on the same?
Well, I feel like it's a balance between the market pull and supply. A reason why this particular tubers have been relegated to smallholder farmers is especially just for subsistence levels, because farmers don't have the confidence that the market has enough pull for them to think about it commercially. And that's really where the gap is. If you look at things like cassava, farmers have always been wondering, I'll cook it at home, I'll provide it for my family at home, but sell a couple of tubers just to make a little bit of money, but that's it. No one is really thinking, how can I scale this up to the 2 acres or 5 acres where I can now begin to see some benefit or return. And because the market pull has not been that sufficient, we are aware that there's some policy requiring millers to blend flour with cassava, but that's really has not been taken off or has not been fully embraced. And without that market pull, then subsistence farmers will always be at that particular level, because they'll be wondering, yes, I will grow, but where will I take it to? And that's exposes them to some shocks, because if I put in my 100,000 or let's say my 20,000 shillings on the ground, expecting to reap about 50,000 bob, and at the end of the day I don't get that, then it dents my confidence in that. I'll probably go to maize where I know that there's a market and invest in that rather than in the tubers. And so this strategy is really trying to bring a balance between the market side and the production side, to see how can they begin to talk to each other so that there's an adequate pull from the market to incentivize the farmers to begin production.
And before we go to our conversation on value chains, Juma here had a point on the same.
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in on the issue of the cost. And it has been mentioned that you produce more, then you'll get more. But in our strategy, we are handling it as the whole value chain approach. We have to do awareness creation at both ends, at the market side and at the production side. For a farmer who never used to buy seed, the vegetative propagation, they could get it from a neighbor, we'll have to convince the person that you actually have to buy from a certified person that seed or that vine or cutting for cassava that is clean, that will produce more. Now, you produce without the certified seed, this is what you get, and this is what you'll sell. You use the certified seed, this is the amount you will get. So we have to weigh in on that in terms of awareness and the publicity. On the demand side, you know, marketing pulls demand. Demand pulls production. Now, on this other side is now the awareness about the nutritive value of these crops. Once we create that, there is that understanding at the market, they are waiting for it, and the farmers are also willing now to invest in it. Then you'll have the issue of cost for inputs being not a big issue at all.
I see.
Yes.
And we are already getting into the subject of value chains, and I'd imagine that that's a critical element when it comes to developing a strategy like this one, because it is one thing for farmers to produce, but then you need to be assured that across the value chain, one, value is preserved and added in some cases, and that by the time you get into the final consumer, at least one, you have a guaranteed market, and that two, this is a sustainable market. George, I'd be curious to know your thoughts around how the structure of the value chain is, especially in light of some of the proposals that we might be having in the strategy.
Yeah, if you look at, for example, the dairy sector in Kenya, we were at the level that we are now, probably 20, 25 years ago, for the roots and crops in Kenya. And it took us some time to be able to organize the dairy sector and make it move, bringing in the aspects of certification standards and ensuring that post-harvest losses are actually reduced. Now, what has to happen within these roots and tuber crops is that there has to be a proper coordination within the value chain, both vertical and horizontal integration, where farmers are able to come together to understand that they are actually facing a common challenge, that is the horizontal, and the strategies has to come and be embraced by them, that these can really work in terms of addressing issues related to productivity, in terms of addressing issues related to quality and standards, and in terms of addressing issues related to pricing. I'll give you an example. If you go to Kilifi, for example, where there's a huge production of cassava, you'll find them selling a bunch of cassava, 3-4 pieces, at 100 shillings. If you talk to Stephen, who buys cassava for the purposes of selling out or as an off-taker, he will tell you that I cannot buy that cassava at 50 shillings per kg. I'll probably buy it at 6 shillings. And that brings the aspect of making the farmer aware that it is not about the price, higher price, but it's about increasing the productivity to be able to understand what is your gross margin analysis, at what point you break even. Now, on the vertical integration is the players must be able to, the farmers must be able to talk to the marketers must be able to talk to the consumers, and the government or the policy regulators must be able to come, and there must be a platform for the same to be able to discuss issues that are related to making that value chain work. That is how the dairy industry was reformed. It is currently working well. These are regulations. There are regulators. They talk to each other. They know what are the challenges they face, and they move on. So if there is no coordination and some sort of talking to each other, it will be a tall order for us to understand, to make the value chain work.
But George, to be fair,
yes.
For example, when you give the example of the dairy industry, what you must appreciate is that this industry was structured in the sense that we had aggregators, we had cooperative societies,
yes.
which then put farmers together, and they began now to have a common voice.
Yes.
I'm not sure we have that kind of structure.
We don't have, because everybody in this country, probably 90%, take milk. Not everybody take cassava or sweet potatoes. That is the issue. you know of cancer, for example. You'll find if you go to organic facts, you'll find that these countries that take a lot of cassava actually have lower prevalence of cancer. So the awareness creation is the most important, and we can do it. If you look at the policy that the government is talking about, ensuring that cassava is actually blended within the flour, that would pull the market and would make these farmers to organize themselves into cooperatives, into groups that can then be able to supply. Without that, and that is the coordination I'm talking about, without that, we'll not be heading anywhere. And what motivates you to organize yourself is the market pool. If there is no market, you are not sure where you are going to sell it. You are not sure what quantity you are going to take. It becomes very difficult. As Self-Help Africa, we have done we have tried our best to be able to bring in investors. At one point in 2016, we brought an investor from the US who was ready to come and buy and set up a processing plant in Kisumu and invest and produce starch. Why should we, for example, import starch from Brazil? Why? Because the cost of production is not there in Kenya, and the cost of production there is smaller. So when we organize ourselves into these groups, we can be able to speak with one voice and go to the government and tell the government the cost of production of cassava is very high. We can do it here the way Brazil is doing, the way Uganda is doing, and the way Mozambique is doing.
I see.
Yeah.
And to move there to Steve, I was reading the strategy last night, and one of the things I saw and thought would be a challenge is that we're talking about streamlining what reads to me like a very informal value chain. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is that I don't see existence of a massive off-taker from the farmers. You know, when we always cite, for example, coffee, there's KPCU at the end of the day. We always talk about maize, there's NCPB at the end of the day. But these particular crops don't have that kind of off-taker. Do you foresee this as a key challenge?
It is a huge challenge. Most established value chains usually have a major off-taker to enable them to succeed in terms of organizing the farmers and things like that. I call it an organized chaos, especially on this roots and tubers. And there's an ecosystem that thrives in this organized chaos, where there's fragmentation between off-takers. There's no clear market, there's no clear route to market for farmers, and that's why you don't see a lot of development in that particular space. As George alluded to, there's been a lot of push to get investors to come into this particular space for starch production, to get into things to do with blending, and some of the big names have been approached to see how can we begin to drive that pool. But the big question that keeps coming up is the issue of price. The price of production here in Kenya is extremely high as compared to our neighbors or other regions. Producing starch here in Kenya would be twice as much as our neighbors. And that now brings us back to the production level. Why is the price so high? And farmers are saying, you know what, my cost of production is very high, cost of inputs is very high, I'm not getting good planting material, and my yield is not ideal. It's not making commercial sense to me. And that's why this strategy really, I think, should be trying to address this particular problem, because the off-takers are there, but the big issue is, will we be able to get it at a commercially viable price? And will we be able to get it at a consistency that can be able to be sustainable? For starch, for one of the big companies, of up to 200 metric tons of starch in Kenya, why we don't have the capacity to be able to produce that right now? And so a lot of work has to go into the production to make sure that cost is ideal, as George has alluded to also. If farmers in Kilifi are expecting a certain price that's unrealistic with the market dynamics, then that presents a big problem. And that's why education needs to happen, for them to understand what is the ideal cost of production, what is my minimum, where is my break-even level. so that I can be able to understand that sweet spot. And that's what happened to tea, to coffee, to sugarcane, and to these other particular value chains, where farmers have been able to understand, this is my cost of production, this is my gross margin that I can work with, and this is the ideal price. And all the players within the value chain have understood that these are the price metrics, and it's become a fair playing ground.
I see. Juma, you seem to have a thought around this issue of the value chain.
Value chain, yes. If you look at what we have alluded to from the beginning, that this was, such a strategy was not there. So the farmers were operating independently. So they didn't have this, the platform to air the issue of cost of production. Like my colleague talked about the dairy industry. So they must have started the way the roots and tuber crops are. But the strategy talks about the coordination of production from farm up to the market. Now, the issue of mobilizing farmers in terms of, we call it clustering, that you mobilize them so that they can produce enough quantities. And how do they now get into the market? We are talking about you cluster the farmer in certain areas, then you provide some aggregation centers where they can at least take their produce, and also where somebody who wants to do business can actually go to these aggregation centers instead of going for moving around the counties getting these crops. First, they are bulky, they are perishable, and you cannot, you don't have enough time to either store it. You can store maize, you can store all the other crops, but not the roots and tubers. So it must be coordinated from the time, even the seed, you hear the seed is perishable. So from the time the seed entrepreneur is planting to sell, you must have a market. So that once the seed matures, there is somebody to get the seed, plant it. And once the crop matures again, there is somebody to pick it. That is what the strategy is doing, trying to coordinate the whole value chain so that everybody, there is equity in terms of the income from the roots and tubers. Now, the issue of coordination, the horizontal, is what we're now calling the clustering. Bring them together at the grassroots and at the planting. On the vertical, that we also have to link everyone. The strategy proposes technical working groups. So you'll have at the national, you have some technical working group, linking with the technical working groups at the counties, so that it is from the national level up to the county level. So we will have the whole value chain coordinated.
Okay.
Previously, it wasn't there.
I see.
Yes.
We just did the intro into the roots and tuber strategy and why this is critical for Kenya. We've discussed the value chain, we've discussed the aggregation of farmers, and matters around seed quality, which of course Florence was delving into. Whenever we talk about agricultural produce, one of the key issues that comes up is imports from other countries, and many times we'll have an influx. For example, a few months back we had the issue of maize. We've had this same conversation around sugar. I'd like to get a sense of how this looks like when you look at these roots and tubers, and perhaps Juma sitting at the ministry would have a better perspective of this. And how is the landscape like in terms of imports coming into the country?
You'll realize that their consumption is not as high, and we have not really gone into the issue of production of starch as such in terms of the demand for that. And mainly the roots and tuber crops we have, the production we have is, for now, is actually, we would say it is sufficient because, like you said, there was that not everybody is consuming. But if you go to the counties that are producing the roots and tuber, then you find the consumption is high. So we have not had as much as the requirement from the processors. If you look at those who are processing starch, of course you've had the issue of import substitution. There are people who are doing that have gone to starch, but on a low scale. Our main objective first is to increase that production. Once we have the volumes, of course the volumes will now get other people wanting to have more of the cassava to produce either starch, or even, you can get even ethanol from it, from cassava. So the production, of course we have not reached the potential. If you go to cassava, we are going up to 12 to 15 tons per acre. per hectare. The potential is almost 40 to 50. So even we have a big gap to bridge if we go by the strategies, the interventions proposed by the strategy.
Okay.
So in terms of our need, we have first to do the issue of consumption awareness, and then we might, if we want more, then that might maybe necessitate the issue of importation. But as currently, we wouldn't really say we require the importation, unless, of course, the one that across the neighbors. I mean, you at the borders,
yeah,
especially in Western. I mean, we have families across the country, so that kind of inflow or outflow, yeah, I mean, it is always obvious because of the cross-border relationships.
I see.
Yes.
And Florence, just to get your thoughts around this, especially as you mentioned the border and the flow that we have there, how do you ensure the standards are still adhered to, especially when products are coming from a neighboring country?
So one of our major mandate is to, actually our goal is to protect Kenya's agriculture, and especially from pests and diseases. So even for where I'm based at the plant quarantine station, our major mandate is to ensure that all the products that are plant-based and are coming from other countries are free from pests and diseases. Because all of us understand with this globalization, there is a lot of movement of people across the borders, and that means that there is a lot of movement also of products across the borders. And when it comes to plant materials, so there is also high chances of these materials to go along with diseases. So as KEFIS, we have a key mandate to ensure that these products, if we are getting a product from other countries, even if we take a case of example of the root and tuber crops, for example, if it is cassava or sweet potato, we know there are diseases that are usually in these crops that we don't want them introduced in our country. So as KEFIS, during the process of allowing this product to come in, we assess all these risks and allow you to bring in the material based on the level of risk. There are materials that would be based on the diseases that are there, we may not allow you to bring in. But if we assess and see these are risks that we can manage, we can allow you to bring these products. But KEFIS will be checking keenly. We have laboratories that are internationally accredited to ensure that we test and ensure that this product that is coming in does not introduce these pests and diseases. So we also issue the permits. We are the only institution that is mandated to issue permits for plant products that are coming into the country. The same way we also issue you with documents to assure that you take your crop to another market. Assuming now we have the investors in the root and tuber crops and people, traders now have accessed market abroad, KEFIS also comes in to ensure that this product will also meet the market destination requirements on matters of plant health as well as food safety. Okay. So in all that, we ensure that we also facilitate the trade as well as ensure that we don't introduce these diseases. So like I mentioned, there is this introduction. Again, we also ensure that there is no further spread. Like we mentioned, the issue of moving materials, like the western part of Kenya is very popular with cassava crop, for example. And we have seen a lot of even NGOs interested in investing on buying these materials to ensure that farmers in particular counties have these materials. So with the lack of awareness that these products can distribute these diseases, again, all of us, we might contribute again to ensuring that we have diseases all over in the country. So we are coming in to ensure that with this coordination, even through the ministry, we will bring on all the actors and especially on all the matters of the seed to ensure that all the way from the product developers, those are the breeders, those will be multiplying, and as well as now the farmers or the processors, the product meets the requirements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve and George, there, I want to get to flip a different question to you in terms of when you read the strategy, and because you directly deal with smallholder farmers, the conversation around raising awareness, both in terms of production and as well in terms of consumption. Do you feel the interventions prescribed are sufficient to change the narrative around roots and tubers?
You know, we have to start from somewhere. There's been very little information available to farmers, especially smallholder farmers, on the potential of these roots and tubers. So I believe that this strategy actually now prescribes a good starting point to begin the conversation in enlightening farmers on the potential, on the importance, especially around nutrition, because again, it's one of the big agendas now, food nutrition and food security, and this should be a highlight and a focus for them to be able to understand. Think about our over-reliance on maize as a primary starch. Many smallholder farmers didn't realize that, you know what, potatoes, yams, sweet potatoes or cassava could be an alternative form of starch that is more resilient and not prone to the shocks of weather and low production. And so having this awareness becoming a highlight is very key in trying to spur this roots and tuber space, especially on the production space on smallholder farmers. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
George?
Yeah, thank you. I think before I answer this, I just wanted to contribute towards the importation part.
Yeah.
If you look at international trade, imports can never be get rid of completely, and that's why we exist. You'll find a country having sufficient production of a particular skill or crop and all that, and therefore they have to either export, and Kenya export a lot, so we cannot stop other people from bringing to us anything that we think we are not sufficiently producing. Now, we did an SME mapping within Nairobi, and we got quite a number of SMEs that process cassava, for example, and take them, package them, and sell them in the supermarkets or sell them to the confectionery industry and all that. And surprisingly, they are getting their cassava from Uganda. They move around from Nairobi to Uganda to get it. And why do they get it? Because of the availability. They cannot be able to access it in Kenya. And why are they not able to access it? Because the farmers are not aware, number one. Number two, the cost of production is very high. The cost of production is very high. And those are some of the things that we need to address. How do we bring down the cost of production so that these guys don't go to Uganda to get the same? If you look at the brewing industry, I told you EABL bring on imports of starch from other countries. And currently they are doing sorghum within the country, and that is not even enough. So cassava would be a better substitute for starch processing at that level. So they still rely on the imports of the same. The pharmaceutical industry is basically importing starch from other countries. If you look at that Panadol, that white thing you're seeing there is out of starch, is made out of starch. So the opportunities are enormous. If we could just organize our production to be able to address those issues, and that links to the raising awareness. If you look at this strategy, the raising of awareness and the interventions highlighted therein are sufficient. But what has to drive the raising of awareness is the market. If there is no market, even if you raise awareness, we will not be heading anywhere. So the market is very key in terms of moving this forward.
Okay.
And that is the conversation we need to have with the government. How do we put up mechanisms that can be able to attract investors to come and invest in starch processing within this country? How do we ensure that we go out and tell the farmers and even the entire population of Kenya that we consume, for example, bread in a minimal quantity, but we go to the natural foods so that they can be able to go to the market, Gikomba market, whichever market it is, and buy raw cassava, and is available for them. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I want to come to Juma, and really, if you could give us, what are some of the key outcomes you expect out of this strategy? Because that would definitely be a very key pillar in terms of its execution.
Now, first, maybe just on the issue of importation, is that when you find somebody going to Uganda, not actually getting their satisfying their needs from here, my colleague mentioned about the SMEs. What pulls them to go to Uganda is that they'll get that crop or what they want, maybe at a single place. It's a lot, and you just go here and you get it.
And maybe cheaper.
And cheaper because, of course, economies of scale.
Yeah.
We didn't have the roots and tuber sector coordinated, such that if you are an entrepreneur, of course, a business person will always like to cut costs. So you would rather just get a lorry, or you just go to Uganda, get your produce and come back. In Kenya, you will have to go, you either ask, is it in Busia, is it in Kilifi, is it in what? And there is a lot of cost implication to that. And that's why somebody would go and get it from, not that we can't have all the needs for these SMEs or the manufacturers in the country. It's only they don't know where do you get it and can you get it when you want it. Now, once we create this coordination mechanism, increase production, then you will find that even our local manufacturers or processors will get their commodities from the country because we have enough for them. The only thing is we have to ensure, if it is a business, then you get paid for, you get value for your money. Now, the issue of the outcomes, the interventions in the strategy, what we have proposed, our first interest is to have a value chain. The whole roots and tuber crops value chain developed so that we have that interconnectivity. Then our outcomes, first you'll get the disease-free material, adequate enough, well distributed across the country. So you have something to start up with. Of course, then we are also expecting to have profitable enterprises, from seed entrepreneurs, from the processors, from the consumer, the supermarkets. I mean, profitable enterprises. And of course, then the market. Once we streamline the market, we have talked about product development, the recipes. You know, you have to create that you don't only have to boil sweet potatoes and that's the end of it. Most people know it. You only consume by boiling. Cassava, you boil it, you eat it, but there are other products. So once you create the product, there is a wide range of products you can get from these root crops, then of course you will have the market expanded and then everybody can go into it. And of course, the issue of availability of those products, you say, you go to the shop, people used to go and buy them in the markets. You know, at the marketplace, you buy the tubers. Yeah. But can you go into the supermarket and buy cassava in a packet? You also carry it home. Most people are not aware that you don't have to go to the market and get that cassava unless you want just to boil it. But you can also get the flour, the bread, the cakes, the issue of confectionery. So once you expand that, then you expect that the market is expanded.
I see.
Those are our outcomes: the market, the enterprises, and of course the planting material will be in plenty.
Okay. Before I get forward, just to get Steve's thoughts around the anticipated outcomes on this strategy.
Okay. I'll also talk about a little bit about imports, and what it tells me is that there's a lot of potential in this country. If industry is going out of the borders to get this product, it means that we are sitting on gold and an opportunity here that we need to tap into. And one of my major outcomes is to see how this particular market can now drive production, because it has to be a market-driven initiative where the off-takers, the final consumers, are really dictating what needs to happen at production level in terms of these different use cases for these different roots and tubers. If it's starch, if it's ethanol, if it's in confectionery, if it's in pharmaceutical, is the production being geared towards meeting the specific market requirements? Are we looking at the right kind of yields, the right kind of variety or sub-varieties that can be able to extract the maximum amount of starch, the maximum amount of ethanol, or whatever else is needed in the market? So the market, the product fit for the market is really key for me. because I feel like the market is there. It's just unorganized and not communicating to each other. But there's a lot of intervention that needs to happen at that particular level, even at a policy level. And this is something that we alluded to earlier, where government really needs to now begin to enforce the issue of blending, so that we can stop our over-reliance on maize as a primary starch, and to see that market pool begin to drive production. And when we see that happening, then you can now begin to see issues of food security become a different kind of conversation. Things to do with nutrition become a different kind of conversation. I can now begin to say comfortably in my household, we'll move away from bread and start, eating cassava bread or yams or sweet potatoes, because there's adequate supply. The price is just right. It fits the market requirements, and everyone in the value chain is happy.
Okay. George?
Two things that I expect as the key outcomes in this. Number one is the improved coordination. That is the most important, that you are able to address an improved coordination of these value chains. If the farmers are talking to each other, the farmers are talking to the processors are talking to the consumers. That is the most important thing. Number two, we expect, because nobody will be able to invest in a value chain that is not properly coordinated. If there is an improved coordination, then that will attract investments. And all that we are talking about here, Steve is talking about the pharmaceutical, the confectionery, the brewing, the ethanol industry, will just come automatically. So those are the two things that we need to drive: coordination of the value chain and increased investment. Those are the only two outcomes.
But George, on the point of increased investment, don't you feel that a lot lies outside the purview of the strategy? And when I talk about a lot, I mean something like, cost of energy. If I'm an investor coming into this value chain,
yes,
the first thing I'll ask is, what's the cost of energy relative to other markets?
You just aired here that Kenya is the third most important investment attraction destination for most investors in Africa. So it means that our cost of energy and all that is at manageable level. So the most important thing is, if there is an improved coordination, they talk to each other, then you can be able to see how best do you manage issues related to energy costs, issues related to cost of production, issues related to the logistics and all that. The cost of energy probably could not be at the level that we need it, probably might be higher. But if we manage other costs, it would actually absorb the higher or slightly higher cost of energy. So that is the most important thing. If there is no coordination, who will talk about it? Nobody. So you only push well when you know that you are speaking in one voice, in a specific value chain.
And to come to Florence, and really when I talk about outcomes, Florence, from your perspective, I'd like to know in terms of the standards that would be set up for this particular segment.
I first agree with everyone else that the need for coordination, and with this strategy now we're going to see a lot of progress, and especially in terms of first bringing everyone on board in the whole value chain, because we have processors in this country for these crops. We don't know, or farmers may not be knowing what kind of varieties they need. So once we get even from the processors, these are the products they need, then again investing on seed production or even farming on those crops again, we are seeing we shall be having a lot of opportunities, especially even for investors in terms of businesses in seed, that we will see improved even opportunities for employment even for our youths, and address the cases of unemployment. So when it comes to the issues of standards, with this strategy we are seeing now that it will even empower us more as KEFIS to now invest more on improving on the current standards and regulations towards these crops, because at the end of the day we want to see a lot of investment in this crop, because in these root and tuber crops, because again, like everyone is saying here, without the pull for these crops, and when we talk of that, there is the issue of value addition, which is very key, and processing opportunities, as well as consumer awareness, because with that, if more consumers or more farmers or more people will start consuming these crops, again we'll see the need even for farmers to invest on planting these crops, and as well for the seed entrepreneurs to see the need why they need to do seed production for such crops.
Okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, you have a point, George?
Yes, I have a point. I just wanted to bring in a caveat that writing this strategy is one thing, implementing the strategy is a different thing. So if we are not aggressive enough or active enough, or we don't take a deliberate kind of effort to ensure that whatever we have written here in this strategy is implemented, we are not going to move anywhere. I would want to see a situation where there's an organization of an investment conference in terms of calling potential investors to invest in the cassava value chain, and the Ministry of Agriculture is pushing that forward, and then as different stakeholders and interest groups come in to support that, to bring on board people who can be able to participate and understand this value chain, take effect. Otherwise, if there is no driver, we'll just be talking, just like in this country, you have always said it. They are written, but they are in the shelves. After that, the implementation becomes very difficult. So implementation is very key.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one person on Twitter here is asking, can the panel comment on the aspect of the weather reliance of these particular crops and how they would fare when compared to the traditional maize and other crops that are normally planted by farmers in Kenya? Juma, if I could start with you.
Actually, when we refer to these crops, we are calling them climate smart. Climate smart means they are resilient. They, even of course, with the climate change, you will find that the rainfall is going down and temperatures are going up. These are the crops that are resilient to that. It's actually a way of mitigating against the vagaries of weather. So if we go into this, you would find even we will open up the ASAs, the arid and semi-arid areas, where the climate was not conducive for the other crops. So they are resilient. When you say resilient, is that they can do well even with a changing climate. That is how the crops are related to climate.
Yeah, these are drought-resistant crops. If you KALRO are actually propagating, one of the key elements they were looking at is pest and disease control pest and disease resistant as Florence indicated, but also the second aspect is drought tolerant in terms of the effect of the climate change. 2017 early was very bad in western part of Kenya, and I was driving from Homa Bay towards Kisumu, and every place was dry, but the only crop you could see with the green leaves was cassava, which therefore means it's a drought-tolerant crop. We have had instances where our seed entrepreneurs that we work with in Busia actually selling cuttings or cassava seeds to farmers from Elgeyo Marakwet, which therefore means that is and you know the kind of weather conditions in Elgeyo Marakwet. Yeah.
And Florence, there's a question here asking, how does a farmer ensure they get the certified seed, and even when they access seeds, how do they verify the quality of it?
For these vegetatively propagated crops, like we mentioning, we are not yet there to have a system whereby we have a product that a farmer can now certify or check and see that it's a certified seed. But for these other crops like maize, we already have a system. KEFIS has instituted a seed label on the packets of the seed where farmers can scratch and send that number to confirm whether it's certified seed, because we have a list of all the certified sellers of the seed, and there is a particular unique number that KEFIS would know that this particular seed is certified. So we are trying to see, even for these crops, as we move towards strengthening this system, at some point we'll be able to see how a farmer would know that. But for the current situation, basically the issue will be if the materials will be having diseases, then that will mean that it's a crop that is not good for your yields.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any reaction on the same?
Yeah, maybe just a question also. I know we're talking a lot about yams, cassava, but also potatoes fall into that particular space.
Yeah.
And one of the big issues that I know exists in that space is the availability of good planting material and good quality seed, certified seed, because the issue is that farmers are recycling their seed quite a bit, reducing yields, and what is coming out is that on the market side, the potatoes are not really fit for market because they're small, either diseased or things like that. And maybe that's something that maybe we could address to see how.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also KEFIS is always having that term of quality declared seed. Is it?
We talk
And
more
not
of
certified.
the certified seed.
You talk of certified, but for the vegetative propagated, how?
Elsewhere in other countries, they have that system of quality declared seed.
Okay.
But again, we have challenges with that.
Okay.
Because when you look at the whole system of seed certification, it's a process. It's not most of the ones who have the quality declared seed. Okay, they like maintain minimum standards in
Yes.
terms of just visually checking where there are diseases. And when you talk of like crops like Irish potato, there are also diseases that are in the soil. So KEFIS has to check that if you're producing seed for Irish potato, that seed is free from bacterial wilt. Is a disease that affects it in the soil, as well as potato cyst nematode. So when we talk of the quality declared seed, there are other countries who are implementing that. Possibly with time is something we can explore and see how would it benefit, especially for these RTB crops.
But you're saying that in Kenya the focus is on certified seed.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a question here, and I think this one goes to Juma, about the strategy and the risk of over-regulation. And I think this person is coming from the background where they've seen dairy regulations where we're told even if you're doing house-to-house retail for your supply at home, then there would be some regulation around it. Just to clear the air in terms of the risk of over-regulation in light of the strategy.
Now, the strategy is a roadmap, and it's a plan. It just shows the direction of where we are moving. So we are not anticipating a lot of regulation. This is not a regulation to try and to force everyone to follow it. We have said it is a roadmap trying to bring everyone on board. So we do not have any regulation apart from the regulations on blending.
Yeah.
There are regulations which are currently going, they are just waiting to be at the final stages before they are gazetted. We are going into the regulatory impact assessment before you finalize with the blending regulations. So that is the only one. The other ones are already the standards, the standards, the regulations which are currently there in terms of in the agricultural sector, not necessarily as an outcome of the strategy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I want to pick on something which George mentioned, and that is we normally have good strategies, but then implementation becomes a question. And I'm curious to know, in terms of the structures we have for monitoring and evaluation, as far as the strategy is concerned, what's in place? If I could start with you, Juma.
Yes. Now, you know, there are so many books you find in the shelves. Even if you go to a bookshop, you still find books. You go to offices, there are books. Our intention with the strategy is that the finalization of the strategy, we launched it in 16th October in Makueni during the World Food Day. Actually, that was the starting, because we are just putting the plan. But the implementation is that after this, the implementation is creating the structures, those coordination structures first. Because even from the discussion here, it has been repeatedly said so, that you need to coordinate the sector. So we will go into now creating those structures, the technical working group, the issue of clustering, so that we first have the structures in place. Once you have the structures in place, then we go into capacity building now, both the county and the people, even at the national level. And then now you go into now the real business of increasing production, market coordination, value addition, and all that.
Okay.
So the first thing is creation of the structures first. You know, in a system you must have some, you know, the wheels moving. So create them first before you start moving.
And before I get the other panelists' view on the aspect of the monitoring bit of it.
Yes.
So in terms of phasing out, whether we could be talking about short-term, medium-term, and long-term, do we have such a structure in place?
You know, this the first one. once we establish these structures, we start the process of coordinating the system. Then we at the national level will capacity build the counties to create these structures. Then of course, extension is that the counties. So the counties will also have to put their plans, including what has been suggested in the strategy, so that we have that as the national government pulls out, leaving the counties now to move. Ours will be just the monitoring and evaluation. Once you create the structure, you establish the value chains, then the value chains, now the platforms will now move on.
Okay.
Yes, we don't intend to be all throughout, like we are still implementing even at the county level. Once we establish the structures, we create the technical working groups, the counties pick them up, it is included in the CIDPs of the counties. Okay. Then now that is what sustainability will come from.
Yeah, I just, maybe Juma is just forgetting, but I wanted to say that in this strategy, there's an implementation matrix. And in that implementation matrix, it shows clearly the timelines in terms of what we need to do and how much is required for the same. So if there is that deliberate effort to be able to follow that implementation matrix, then we will be able to review intermittently, or as we move on, how we are doing on the same, on each and every activity. I think it's something that we can do, and it is something that we need to look at. Mm-hmm. I wanted to say that the implementation part should not be an issue if there is a driver, and I repeat, if there is a driver. For example, at Self-Help Africa, we are being funded by the EU to work with the enterprises that are actually able to integrate smallholder farmers in our agriculture. It's called an Agri-Fi program. And currently there is a call out, and we are looking at enterprises that would really work in these kind of value chains. So I'm looking forward to seeing, because the deadline is 20th of November, to seeing an enterprise somewhere who is able to articulate to us and tell us, we want to work with smallholder farmers who are producing cassava, sweet potatoes, to be able to make these products to this level. If such kind of SMEs will come on board, we'll be ready to work with them. And that's how we want to move this strategy. As we are moving on, even if the strategy has not started to be implemented, but I believe it is as we move on. Yes.
And from where you sit, what's the landscape looking like for this kind of enterprises who would be now playing really the processor role at that level, looking for smallholder farmers for partnering?
They are there. And one of the issues, like for example, I gave an example of an SME going to Uganda to buy produce. So one of the killer challenges is he's not able to get somewhere where he can be able to get cassava in bulk. So what we are saying is, give us a proposal that you want to organize farmers, bring them together, improve their productivity, and be able to buy from them, whichever number you want, whichever count it is in this country. Those are some of the SMEs, and they are out there in Kenya. And we have done that call. In fact, it was through the Daily Nation some time back. Yes.
Okay. Yes. And Stephen, just to get your thoughts around this, because we're talking about implementation, and oftentimes we make it look like it's a government job, but actually it's for both state and non-state actors. Yeah. Mm-hmm. From a non-state perspective, and especially in terms of plugging into this strategy, what do you think can be done?
So I do agree, it's not just a government drive, though I do believe that government plays a very key part in pushing this agenda. But also markets do play a big part in it, and SMEs, and we work with SMEs, especially as TruTrade, trying to bridge that gap in terms of working with smallholder farmers and linking them with this particular SMEs. And so I feel like this initiative should be driven a lot by the markets and the market players, these SMEs, MSMEs, bringing some structure and some order into this particular value chains, so that you can create a perfect ecosystem for production to happen, for farmers to have the confidence to invest, because that's really key. If farmers don't believe in this strategy, then we're just talking. But they have to really see the value in it, and they have to see that value has to be in terms of first food security, but also in terms of money in their pocket. And it's as simple as that. Is it bringing returns to them in terms of money in their pockets, so that they can begin to invest in things that are important, healthcare, education, and things like that. And you can begin to see the local economies transforming. working with non-government actors also in terms of NGOs who are working with farmers to try to organize them, because again, SMEs cannot do the work of organizing smallholder farmers. It's a very complex space. It's not easy to organize these people. So government has a part to play in that. Non-state actors, non-governmental organizations have a part to play in organizing these farmers, begin to talk to each other, begin to form these aggregation centers. And I know that there's a lot of intervention in that particular space, trying to bring them together, to pool and to to make them work together as a group, so that SMEs can now tap into those particular groups and be able to now leverage on that to pull in the volumes and have the consistency that they require. And that's what I really feel should be happening.
Someone is asking here, please ask George and Steve how they define smallholder farmers and how they can be accessed.
Well, for us, a smallholder farmer is anyone who have an acreage of between half an acre up to 10 acres. Now that could be relative, because in places like Kilifi have gone, I talked to a farmer and he told me that if I have 100 acres, that's like a smallholder farmer to me, because there's so much land there. So it's relative, but usually someone who has half an acre to 10 acres, but also it depends on what acreage of that particular land is under production. So somebody could have 10 acres of land maybe inherited, but is only plowing half an acre because that's their capability, and those are the smallholder farmers that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I agree with Steve. Is a very kind of relative definition, but the emphasis should be under production. Whatever they have that is under production, between that limit range that he has actually highlighted.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's also the question around what sort of yield. I know this would vary from crop to crop, but the question is, when they talk about an ideal yield that should be realized, what do we have in mind?
I'll speak for cassava, which I have quite a knowledge about, and I think it's also there in the strategy Juma will highlight. If you look at western part of Kenya, you'll find that with the current status is about about 7 metric tons per acre. Yeah, and that's a minimal good agricultural practices, and the crop is not actually well maintained and all that. But it has the potential, given the varieties that we have, of getting between 12 to 15 metric tons per acre.
Okay.
Yeah.
Juma, any thoughts on the yield?
Yeah, the yields for cassava currently, I talked about 10 to 12, but you could go up to 40. They have
10 to 12 what? It's just for clarity.
Metric tons
Okay.
per hectare.
Yeah.
And there are varieties that can go up to 50, and of course with the good agricultural practices. And if you do with the commercialization in mind, we are talking about the person who starts with a clean seed, good agricultural practices, then you can get those yields. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on the yield? Perhaps Lawrence? Steve?
Well, yield, I think, for us, especially on the market side, really affects pricing.
Yes.
Because if a farmer is able to plow an acre and only get 3 tons, that's been a reality. We have faced that.
Yes.
Then it doesn't make economic sense for them to continue production, and that's why clean planting material, good agricultural practices are very key to take that yield to the maximum that is possible. And you're talking about 15 tons an acre, then it begins to now make sense.
Yes.
For them, because they can be able to see now the return on investment. That will just be for cassava. For Irish potatoes should be something different. But in terms of yield, I think one of the big challenges, especially in the country, is in terms of yield. Where smallholder farmers are really struggling is that they're not able to maximize on yield per acre, and that's really affecting how prices play. And that's now limiting their access to markets, because our neighbors are able to maximize. Because you think about a farmer in Uganda is able to get the maximum 12 to 15 tons per acre, meaning that their price points will be much lower, and that's why it's attracting our markets to look into those particular countries. Yes. So it's a really key driver in terms of pricing.
And there's a question here in terms of the implementation matrix. How soon should we expect the technical working groups to be in place, especially at the counties? I think this would be more in your line, Juma.
Yeah, that's actually our, after we of course we launched the strategy, we are doing publicity now. The implementation starts from today. After the launch, you are into now implementation. Now the technical working group, the first thing we'll do is that we'll have to go and now sensitize the counties, because they are the people who will be producing, producing the crops in terms of mobilizing the farmers.
Yeah.
Once we have done the sensitization, they understand the strategy, because the first time they came into contact with the strategy is when we were doing the consultations, the technical consultations, the stakeholder consultations. So after we have now put it together, even of course we invited some of them during the validation of the strategy. Now the strategy is complete. We have to take the whole bit, the whole strategy as it is, and also talk to them about the issue of the implementation matrix. Once that is done, then now we'll embark on doing the technical working groups.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's a question here which I know it sounds funny, but it's a very important question in terms of, do we have a popular version of this strategy?
Yeah, of course, once you have the strategy here, it is in our website, Kilimo website, then of course we'll go into the popular version, because not everybody can read this. You know, Kenyans are like that. Of course, with the constitution, I can see even there is a popular version here. So usually it is the first thing. It's the first thing. Nobody will read the whole bit,
Yeah.
but you will have to create a popular version such that it's like a pocket book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And really on that same ride, if I could get to Steve and George there, in terms of disseminating this information to smallholder farmers, what are some of the strategies you would be proposing? And especially because you interact with them often, what would you be deploying to ensure that there's ownership of this strategy?
Yeah, I think as Self-Help Africa, what we are doing is that we are actually trying to work or create or establish platforms at county levels. Of course, the first people that you'll have to reach out to is the Ministry of Agriculture at different county levels. So we have created a platform in Kilifi. We are currently working with Migori County in terms of forming a platform for the same. We are in Busia forming a platform for the same. Siaya, there is already an existing platform that we are going to plug in. So the first entry into reaching out to the farmers is through these platforms. Thereafter, and these platforms are formed in a way that every other stakeholder within the cassava value chain is, or the roots and tuber crops value chains are represented. We have the farmers there. We want to make the private sector to be there. Of course, the government will be there, and different stakeholders, KFIs, will be invited to look at the issues related to quality, planting materials and all that. So that's the strategy. And then we'll go about sensitizing farmers on the importance of growing cassava, improving the productivity, showing them that it's actually about the output that is going to make them have, make it have a commercial sense. And also, we are also talking about the component of nutrition. In our organization, we have a key component of nutrition where we go out and tell people, inform households about the importance of growing cassava, the nutritional value that actually cassava is actually adding over. Of course, we have the gender and inclusion aspect, gender inclusion aspect. You know, in this country, men sit back. The women are always in the forefront in the chambers. So we are trying to bring in a family kind of life model where we want a household to look at farming as a common thing that should be done between the husband and the wife. And that's how we are trying to see how to sensitize the farmers on the same.
Okay,
just to pick up on that, especially on the issue of women, because in our work, and especially in Kenya, we work with 45% women, smallholder farmers. And we found that they are very good conduits in terms of spreading the message. You're able to sell to them, they're able to understand much faster, and able to you'd almost imagine that they're the ones running the home, because the one who controls the kitchen really runs the home. And if you really get to the women, then you're able to now sensitize them on the importance of this particular strategy, but also just on the issues of nutrition has been mentioned, on the issue of food security, and also showing them practically that this does work, that this can be a commercially viable thing. One of the things that we're always talking about, especially working with enterprises, is look, we need to move smallholder farmers from subsistence to commercial. from just feeding themselves to feeding their neighbors. And that kind of mindset requires us to be talking to them every single time. And the platforms that are being created are great avenues for doing that, working with Self-Help Africa and other non-governmental organizations, but also these other small groups, cooperatives that are being formed by the government in those particular forums. That conversation needs to keep on going. But I believe women will really be the driver in making sure that this succeeds.
Okay. And something which we haven't touched on in terms of the strategy, and very quickly, if I could start with you, Juma, in terms of credit access, because that is normally a key issue whenever you talk to smallholder farmers and farmers by and large.
Of course, we have to, in terms of production, the factors of production. You have land, labor, capital, and of course management. So capital in terms of financial access is very key. The strategy talks about creation of products, financial products that will be accessible to the farmers, and that is what now we'll have to these technical working groups and with the stakeholders, the value chains. In these value chains, you are forming. Even the financial institutions will be part of the value chain forums, such that then you can create financial products in relation to either the areas or the capacity of the farmers to pay. I know we have a project with, there is a project itself, what they are running on cassava. There is a credit aspect, and they are working with microfinance to ensure that you can create products that relate or that are conducive for that particular enterprise. So there is an aspect in the strategy, the issue of creation of financial products that are accessible to the farmers.
Okay.
Yes. Just to add on that, I think in the agricultural sector generally, if you look at banks, they tend to shy away from lending to the smallholder farmers, and the reason is basically the risks involved. So we are working with the support of the EU. Self-Help Africa is working with a number of banks. We are currently working with Equity Bank to be able to do credit lending to smallholder farmers. We are working with Rafiki Microfinance Bank to be able to lend to the smallholder farmers. We are also working with the microfinance institutions at the village levels. Remember the approach of the village savings and loaning, and also the group lending approach is very popular with women and is very popular with the smallholder farmers. So we work with them to be able to come up with products that can then be given to a group when they actually guarantee each other, and then they pick that and on lend to their members for the purposes of increasing their productivity. We also have formed aggregation centers. These are actually we are coming up with models that we can say people can learn from. So this is an aggregation center that has proper drying equipment. They have got chippers and all that, and can be able to bring out a very good quality product that is needed by the market. So if an off-taker comes on board, it therefore makes it easier for the off-taker to even for the bank to be able to lend to the aggregation center with the off-taker as the guarantor, so that when they sell, then they are able to pay the other side.
All right.
Yeah, so that's what we have.
And I'm told time is fast spent. Just to get our closing remarks, if I could start with Florence on the strategy, your winding up thoughts and why this strategy is important for this country.
I know the issue of public-private partnership will be very key. Currently, there is a lot that is happening, and many players or no one is knowing who is doing what. So bringing us on board through the ministry coordination, we are going to know what is currently happening. If there are processors who are working on cassava, Irish potato, sweet potato, we need to understand what are they currently investing on, what kind of varieties they want. We will have the farmers there, they will iron out their issues. These are the issues that we want. We have the universities, and currently there are a lot of technologies, even to address some of these challenges of lack of enough seed. We have researchers, and especially University of Nairobi, we have even students working on new technologies to have enough production of these materials that are clean. So having everyone on board, again, we are going to move far in terms of implementation. Not forgetting, again, resources will be required, especially for some of the public institutions like Calro, even the universities. We need also to see the government investing a lot on increasing resources so that we gear towards implementation of the strategy.
Okay, Steve, very quickly, please.
So I'll just mention three things. The strategy is offering us a structure and a framework that which we can begin to address some of the challenges that are facing these value chains, and we begin to work on the chaos, the organized chaos, so to speak, to begin to address some of those challenges that are facing. So I believe that this is a major first step in terms of addressing those issues and trying to really address the issues that smallholder farmers are facing, because I believe that those are a neglected group of people.
George, very briefly.
Yes, my final remark is that for a value chain to develop, it has to be private sector driven, it must be government regulated, and the civil society must come on board to facilitate effective operation of the value chain. And that's what this strategy must look at in terms of implementation.
All right, thank you. Juma, winding up thoughts?
Yeah, mine is that I'm looking at the impacts, enhance nutrition, food security, and also incomes. We needed to get the three, the nutrition, the food security, and the income from the roots and tuber crops. It is high time that these crops also contribute towards ensuring that the country is food secure. We'll just ask the stakeholders who didn't previously have anything to drive them that we have a strategy, which is a roadmap, that everybody should look at it, and then as we start the coordination of the sector, then we will have to realize our goal, which is the big four agenda, 100% food and nutrition security.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.